we like the challenge of the exterior approach. We like the challenge of the tenant in place approach and everything that comes with it.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Zach Semke, your co-host here in Seattle, Washington, and I am joined today by co-host Mary James. Mary, how are you?
I'm great. Still beautiful here in California.
Oh, that's really nice for you. It is not beautiful in Seattle. It's definitely a rainy fall so far. We just had Halloween and the kids got very, very soaked. But they had a good time anyway.
Right. I'm sure it didn't dampen their spirits too much.
That's right. That's right, so to speak. So Mary, you just had a really great interview with Kara Haggerty Wilson of Onion Flats, and I'm really looking forward to diving into that. And this is kicking off Retrofit Month for us here at the Passive House Accelerator, as well as inside the Reimagine Buildings Collective. So, and we're having Kara on for a couple of events this week that we'll talk about at the end of the episode. But really great interview. Before we dive into that, I wanted to thank a couple of fine organizations that make our work possible here at Passive House Accelerator, starting with Source 2050. Source 2050 is our sponsor of the week. So a big thank you to Source 2050 for allowing us to do the podcast and the articles that you and Jay write and all of the programming that we're doing. Also, thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thanks to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050. So big thank you to our sponsors. So let's dive into your interview with Kara Haggerty Wilson, Mary. Maybe we could start by having you recap a little bit of your, I know you followed her work, Kara's work for a couple of years now, and she was on the podcast a little bit ago. And this is a little bit of a follow-up. So could you start there and then we'll dive into the interview?
Yes. So not only her work, but the work of Onion Flats, the firm that she's design director with. And they were a very early jumping into Passive House. And then they pivoted to work, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, exclusively, well, not exclusively, but to focus on deep energy retrofits, and which just is a topic have always been really interested in. So it was exciting to see that shift in their work. And yeah, it's a great interview. It's exciting to see what they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned deep energy retrofits, and that's abbreviated in the conversation as DER. Also, you speak about EUI, which is energy use intensity, and that is a measure that differs depending on where you are. The units involved in EUI can vary depending on whether you're in North America or in New Zealand and Australia and Europe. So that's measured in kilobTUs per square foot per year. And the classic energy use intensity measures just energy use, like energy consumption of a building by square foot. And so a really good EUI would be, say, 15. That could be a really stellar EUI. Many passive house buildings, like multifamily buildings, are like 20 EUI or maybe a little bit more. So in the conversation, you are both discussing net zero calculation around EUI, which I believe, and that is where you take the energy consumption of the building and you subtract from that the energy production of the solar panels. And if you get to a zero, then it's a net zero project. And we'll hear 2.8 EUI and 5 EUI, which are really great numbers, very, very close to zero. So I just wanted to contextualize that a little bit for listeners before we jump in. So with that, let's do it.
Okay, well, welcome to the Passive House podcast. I'm Mary James, and today I'm speaking with Kara Haggerty Wilson, Design Director with Onion Flats. Welcome, Kara.
Hey, thank you for having me.
We last had you as a podcast guest in the spring of 2023, so I'm excited to hear how your work has been going since then, and particularly, of course, your work with deep energy retrofits. And also, I just want to mention right off the bat that you're going to be joining us for the Accelerators Live program on Wednesday, November 5th. So another
Yes.
chance to get to hear you.
Yeah, very exciting.
So can you just give us some brief background about what led Onion Flats to focus on scaling up deep retrofits?
Yeah, we were approached by RMI a number of years ago to be a solutions provider on their team. And I think originally we were looking at Pennsylvania as a target because that's where most of us were. And then we did a series of studies on buildings with developers who were willing to let us in their building and to understand their building and to kind of like conceive of how to execute an energy sprong related deep energy retrofit, but they weren't willing to go the next step. And so that kind of didn't go the way we hoped it would, but it was really exciting at the same time. We saw the potential there. And then when Tim McDonald moved to Massachusetts, the Realize program we went with it in many ways. And the opportunity was kind of there, ready and waiting. There was an infrastructure and, as you know, like a code approach and impetus to make these big changes and these big moves. And so we kind of fell into it in some ways. We started to analyze it as a Pennsylvania solution and ultimately ended up being able to execute it in Massachusetts. But that was over a series of years. That wasn't certainly not an overnight thing that happened.
Right. And yeah, Massachusetts does have a lot of incentives for high performance buildings and making them happen. So it's great that you were able to pivot like that. And and by you, I mean you as a team.
Yeah.
So at this point, how has the DER work been going, and how many projects would you say you have your fingers in right now?
Yeah, well, we just in late spring wrapped up the Hano Homes project in Boston, which was the 20-unit townhouse style deep energy retrofit. The building was over 130 years old. There were some site challenges that made it tricky to work with. And more or less the folks were staying in place while this stuff was happening, while the bulk of the work was happening.
Huge challenge right there.
Yeah. That project was probably 3 years in the making and more when, that's just our time. There's more time in building up to get to that point. So a huge undertaking by the client for sure. And it went really relatively smoothly, I'll say. It took the whole team. It took a lot of very meaningful communication and coordination. And while, you could come up with the design approach that seems correct or seems right, you never really know until you get to open something up and truly see what you're working with. So while we had an approach for systems, we pivoted at one point. We had an approach for the overclad, pivoting again, just based off of what we're learning about the building as we work with our team. So that I think was really successful. It was on time and on budget, which is great. And I think the energy projections, I think, will be realized. We're working with a great client, and their property manager is willing to share information with us. So we're able to collect data more or less, not in real time, but shortly thereafter, to kind of see how it's doing. And it seems to be performing as expected, even without the solar installed just yet. So that's great.
What
We
kind of reductions in EUI were you expecting from that?
if we had hit, so the challenge with Hano was air tightness. If we had hit our passive house level air tightness, we would have been looking at like a 94% reduction. It would have been so close to net zero. It was really, really going to be like a EUI of like a 2.8 or something like that. Now, air tightness was a challenge there. We had old buildings, old party walls that were built in a way that even we weren't expecting to see. There was actually an air gap between the two wides of brick, which is not what one would expect. You might expect there to be a ton of mortar or grout, but we had an air gap, and so we had air moving between floors that was really hard to control. So there came a point where we said we've done everything we can do without kind of overstepping the line of what this project is meant to be from a scope perspective, right? We got it relatively airtight. We just didn't hit passive house. And so I think instead of like a 2.8 EUI, we're looking at like a 5 or something like that, which would still be a dramatic change from the existing. Yeah. So we don't want to like speak lightly of, we didn't hit our targets, but in reality, it's going to be performing in a way that is drastically improved from what it's been performing the last 130 years. So we definitely see it as a success so far.
Wow, it's really amazing to take a building that's 130 years old and make it actually perform really well now. I mean, I'm sure the occupants are thrilled.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the one thing we at Onion Flats don't have. I'm sure that the client does, is that kind of that personal relationship with the tenants after the fact, and hearing, how it's improved, how it's changed their day to day. But would be good to have for sure.
So at that project, you were using site-built construction entirely. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, that's right. So we looked at it maybe momentarily to say, could we panelize this? And there's just a lot of site constraints. They're technically all more or less the same footprint, but at 130 years old, they've settled, things have shifted. There's been modifications over the years. There's no way these things are actually, like a stamp, more or less. And then we had a ton of overhead wires on the site as well. Every building has its own set of service, and between that and cable and phone and all the stuff that was needing to get into the building, there were challenges for actually executing a panelized approach. So we did pivot pretty early on to a site build approach to try to keep it simple.
But the firm has been looking at using panelized approaches, right? I mean, that's sort of the larger goal of the realized project, was to be able to scale up deep energy retrofits.
Yeah. Yep. We've been looking at and continue to look at panelized solutions for projects and try to vet when it makes the most sense. It does seem to be those larger scale buildings and the more maybe utilitarian style, I'll say, that seem to fit best with that approach, at least so far in our experience. I think there's like a mini panel solution out there that maybe can become more flexible with the smaller scale residential, but on the larger projects, it's been a very utilitarian building.
So the simpler form factors are
really helpful. And the repetitive window sizes, and yeah, definitely more conducive to a panelized approach.
Okay, so when we talked to you back in 2023, you were I can't remember exactly where you were on the project, but you were looking at using a panelized approach to a deep energy retrofit. And I
Yeah.
remember you had um, invested a fair amount of research in finding a manufacturer who was interested in working with you on the project. And uh, so I'm just curious, uh, have you been able to apply a panelized approach on a deep energy retrofit since we talked to you in 2023? Have any
Yeah.
of your projects moved in that direction?
Yeah, we do have the one project that is in a little bit of a holding pattern right now, but that would be a panelized overclad approach. And that is it's a 6-story building, brick veneer facade, masonry backup, and a steel frame, steel structural frame. And just what's interesting about it is that it's almost all the same unit type. So there's very, very little variety on the facade. It really is, here's your window, that's what you get, and that's what everybody else gets. So that in that way, the simplest kind of form to deal with. But of course, there's always complications. There's always, a building the wall is bowing slightly here and not there, and how to deal with that. So while something on the surface may look very neat, tidy, and simple, we've found there are layers to everything, no matter how simple it presents itself. So it's been a challenge, but it's also helping us kind of identify the things we really need to focus on so that we can streamline it for the next project and the next. Really.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what those features are aspects of the project that you find you really need to focus on that you maybe hadn't been thinking with so much attention?
It's been interesting. So that when we first started focusing on deep energy retrofits, I think we were really, really focused on those aspects of a deep energy retrofit that attribute to the decarbonization, right? So we're thinking about air sealing, we think about thermal insulation. How do we support the added stuff if it needs to be supported in that way? But there's other things that every building has that are unique, that will affect the decisions you make as it relates to your decarb scope. So for instance, like the fire alarm system, whether or not your project can afford to upgrade it. And if it can't, what does that mean for the decision-making tree and analysis and how you deal with some of the components that may or may not need to talk to the fire alarm system? So there's this little web of decision-making that wasn't totally apparent at the onset of any of these jobs, but is becoming more and more apparent. Another thing we're seeing now over and over again is the accessibility component that comes into play, where you're putting so much money into a project, it exceeds the taxable value of the building as it states that day by more than 30%. And that's easy to exceed on a DER because usually the value is way lower than what it should be. And all of a sudden full accessibility gets kicked in, and it's not something you were entertaining, especially when the goal of the project is to keep people in place. You're not trying to now move a bunch of people out to make improvements that were otherwise could be done over time, or maybe should have been done, 20 years earlier, whatever the case was. We've seen all of it at this point. Those are two of the big ones, I'd say, that really start to make you have to like peel back a few layers and start to understand that each building truly is different. Even if you can get to a replicable approach to the overclad or the DER, if it's interior, whatever it is, there's more to it that comes into play, and it can be kind of just as critical as the decarb scope.
Right, because we're talking about, I imagine, significant budget issues here if you're
yes
to include accessibility into a building that's quite old.
And dimensional constraints. I mean, like, I can't move structure. How many ramps should we really be adding before it is really crazy? We've got a project right now that, the building was built at a time when it should have been accessible at the time of construction. For whatever reason, it is not. But here we are today now trying to do these dramatic energy reduction scope. And now the accessibility scope is now pinned onto this project. And so it is hundreds of feet of ramps, to deal with to make it accessible. So not what we expected as part of the exploration, but it goes along with, I mean, to a certain extent, it makes sense, right? You're putting all this money into a project and you've got to find all the issues with the building that should also be brought up to code at the same time.
Right. And it brings up what is so true, right? With existing buildings, you're budgeting for deep energy retrofit, but then all of a sudden you find some other issue, like the foundation needs work or whatever, as you were saying, once you open up the building, it isn't until you do that you really can finalize your budget costs.
Yeah. We're in the middle of that now on a project, and just today talking about, again, this building is 20 some years old, and it has a crawl space, or it has a series of crawl spaces. It should have a vapor barrier. You would think it has a vapor barrier. So it's got a vapor barrier, which is great, but it's not sealed to anything. So it's not really doing its job. And again, it's one of those things where you can document that all day long, but to actually be able to see what, it's there, but it's not installed correctly. Now we need to do it correctly, potentially, it's tricky to kind of forecast on these projects, especially when part of the ultimate solution is that it's a light touch interior job, or there's limited access to the building for whatever reason during the design period. We end up often finding ourselves digging in really, really deep at the very start of construction when access is more fully granted to the team. All of a sudden, the stuff that you've documented as like verified in field is the time to verify it in field and understand what the scope really should be in order to maintain all the continuity of all the layers that are really critical to executing the project from an energy perspective.
So, are there aspects, of approaching a deep energy retrofit that have become easier since 2023? Or have there been changes in the market? Has your experience with planning them led to you being able to make some decisions more quickly, or technologies that are new? So that's a whole bunch of questions I just threw at you, but
I think especially with getting access to the units tends to be a really tricky thing for some reason. And with any kind of retrofit, you're going to need access. You're going to want to walk through and photograph stuff. But what we've been doing, which has been really, really helpful, is getting a full Matterport scan of all the building interiors, so that the entire team, the contractor, the owner, any of our consultants, has this kind of digital view to the units as they were that day. So when we're looking around and we're saying, are we going to have to move a sprinkler to run this new ductwork? We're not sifting through 1,000 photographs and being unsure of where we were standing when we took it. We've got a scan of the building that we can walk through. It's not necessary, and you can convert it to a point cloud, and you can keep going in that direction. But we found that there is like a threshold where you don't need to do that. Just having the digital imagery is really, really valuable. And then it keeps us out of the building. We're not, knocking on someone's door 100 times trying to get another photograph.
Right, or another measurement, or
yeah. So there's that's been helpful, and we've started to kind of integrate that into pretty much every project at this point, because it's inexpensive and it's pretty valuable with the output and the ability to share it with people as well.
And can you import the scan information into like a building BIM program?
You can pay to have it converted to a point cloud, and then you can pay again to have it converted into Revit. I think some of we'd have to look at the scanning parameters, but I think if you're for like an overclad or panelized approach, you're going to want to go with one of the services that is specifically geared towards a 3D color point cloud scan to Revit product deliverable. and that the Matterport, it may be less dimensionally specific when you go that route. So we tend to use it just as a visual aid. And if needed, you can get like a really quick floor plan out of it if it's like a feasibility study or something like that, where you're not trying to get down to dimensional perfection. But yeah, you can keep kind of going with that information.
So that technology is evolving enough to have various useful outcomes.
Yes, definitely.
Well, that's great. And yeah, I was going to ask you about, for overclad solutions, about scanning. I don't know if you've done this enough to have a experience of how reliable it is, but scanning the outside of the building for specific dimensions for planning, what you're ordering from the manufacturer, from a panel manufacturer. Is that working? Have you tried that?
Yeah, we have scanned and are using it for the overclad project, or the panelized overclad project. And we've not gotten to the point that the panels are being manufactured just yet. But it's a process of having the scan, being able to kind of see any anomalies through the scan, and then the contractor verifying on site with their own kind of scanning setup. So there is like a check set to our scan and all the assumptions we've made based off of our scan. But the scans are really interesting. Like they show, the brick bowing in different places, and you can go and try to get a dimension on it to see, like, is this a problem, or is this just something that needs to be pinned back and we move on? So it's been a good kind of trigger for like a deeper investigation on things that you might not normally be able to capture with the naked eye on site.
Great. Well, any tool that helps.
Yeah.
And how about panel manufacturers? Are you seeing any increase in interest from panel manufacturers for making retrofit panels since we talked in 2023? I know you had found one that was definitely interested in working with you back then, but I wonder if you're seeing growth in that market.
What we've done on a maybe more recent project was we went back to kind of interviewing folks to see how we could expand our group of panelizers that we might go to. And we basically got 2 panelizers who normally don't do overclads and would just do new construction to kind of hop on board and investigate what it might look like for them to participate. That particular project didn't have enough legs to kind of keep going at the time. But so while the field may be expanding, it may be kind of existing players pivoting to consider overclads rather than maybe their bread and butter is new construction. Because I think there is just that added layer of complexity and the unknown with the overclad scope that maybe keeps people away. But we've been working with one team for the overclad panelized project, and we'll keep working with them. But we are still trying to build out my list all the time of like who we've talked to, when did we talk to them, what was their pricing like, what are their actual services like, not just the deliverable itself, the panel, but what do they do during the design process, what don't they do? Because that, I think, was a little bit of the missing piece the first go around, was trying to understand the full package of and setting the expectation for the whole team. What can I ask of you? Versus like having to chase someone down and expecting something that they never, signed up to produce. From that perspective.
Yeah. So, and of course, we've been talking about deep energy retrofits from the exterior, but are you involved in any from the interior, or is your focus mostly on trying to work out overclad solutions so that they work better and can be applied more broadly?
We do have one project that would be considered an interior approach, I'd say. Um, Obviously, with the interior approach, you're not talking about like a tenant in place solution, and so that project is not that. It's quite different. Um, I do, we're open to doing either. I think we like the challenge of the exterior approach. We like the challenge of the tenant in place approach and everything that comes with it. And it with our current clients, that seems to be where they're at as well. But I'm sure as things change and as funding streams change, we might be seeing more like kind of overtime approaches, which would lend itself to an interior approach.
And have you seen more interest from developer owners in doing deep energy retrofits? I understand most of your deep energy retrofit work has been based in Massachusetts. Is that correct?
That's right.
And are you doing some out of state, or is it pretty much exclusively Massachusetts?
It's right now pretty much exclusively Massachusetts with the DER work. Yeah. I mean, we've got a project in Baltimore that's more of an interior approach. And then we still do some new construction work as well. But the DER stuff, I would say, is definitely Massachusetts focused still.
And is that mostly, I'm assuming that it's in Massachusetts because that's where it's easier to get funding and or financing for these projects. Is that correct?
I think so. And I think Birdo plays a role too. So the people are the Boston emissions reduction disclosure ordinance. So, you're needing to do something about your buildings. You're not just opting in, although I think our clients also are in many ways opting in. There's an additional kind of push to at least plan how will you get into compliance. Either we do it all now in one big, extensive intervention, or we start planning about how we do it over time in small increments.
And could you just touch on generally the advantages of both, or maybe the realistic interest from developer building owners in both approaches, sort of a phased approach versus a all at once?
Yeah. I suppose it all comes down to cost, and related to that is like what incentives are still available. At one time there were a lot of kind of incentives you could get in and into the running for and really start to bring down that cost. I probably foresee that as those go away or become less expansive, that folks are going to start looking at the zero overtime approach for retrofits as the one that makes the most sense and is the most attainable. But I guess it's the clients we've been working with so far. In the one client, we've had 3 deep energy retrofits, one completed, one about to start construction, and one just completed documentation for. It seems to be more their general approach has led them to this pathway, whereas I think other teams and other community development corporations are specifically already looking at zero overtime as their specific pathway. And I can only assume it's funding source related.
Right. That makes sense. It's really hard to come up with the financing to do everything all at once.
Yes.
And last time you had also mentioned a calculator tool for building owners, and I was wondering if that has gone on, you've done more work on that, and whether that's something that you can offer out to prospective building owners who are considering doing a deep energy retrofit.
Yeah, it's something we were working on with RMI. It had legs for a while, and it was interesting because it was baking in a lot of the incentives that we were seeing in Massachusetts. So it was a Massachusetts specific calculator, and it was based off of real cost data that we were getting from projects. So as like present time as we could make it. It's still, I think, helpful from a costing perspective because it starts to pull apart tiers of scope and say, I want to do electrification and a really light touch. I want to do as like a tier one. I want to do electrification and a system swap out, windows and doors swap out, roof insulation as a tier two, or I want to go all the way and do a tier three full DER plus solar electrification, everything, and start to be able to, like, with very minimal inputs about the building and its existing utility, start to just plot out the cost range. So at the very beginning of the feasibility of a project, somebody could get a grasp on the order of magnitude of where this could be, and then start to make decisions based off of that. The incentives are obviously changing, so it gets a little tricky. Like, we can keep up to a certain extent, and we can keep the cost part in there. We can update that as much as we can with current information, but the incentive stuff has been tricky to kind of to keep up with what's still active, what's depleted, what's moving, what's not. So while it could be a helpful tool, I don't know that it will be made public necessarily, at least in its current form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand it'd be hard to keep updating, every time the policy shifts to try to update that tool. Yeah. And what about embodied carbon assessments, or sort of, are you doing that is that get baked into your deep energy retrofit process?
Yeah, for the project that just wrapped up for Hano Homes, again, RMI was a player in that project. They did a lot of the embodied carbon analysis. For the project that's about to start construction, I think we did that ourselves, but we used the same tools. And then the overclad panelized project, I believe RMI also was doing the embodied carbon analysis there. So we're using the BEAM tool kind of regardless. So hopefully there's some parity there, but we've been integrating it more and more when it makes sense. It's tricky because to be able to capture all the scope accurately is a real heavy lift, and you really have to understand the project and all the moves that you're making. And then, of course, inevitably something will change. You're having to kind of like reassess and make sure that you're still on the right track in that way. Like we had our overclad panelized project, we weren't going to sit it on a foundation. We were just going to hang it. And so we didn't have any concrete in our embodied carbon calculator. And then it became pretty clear that the panelizer, everybody wanted this stem wall introduced. And so now we've just added all this concrete around the perimeter of the building that we otherwise didn't want to do. So there's always something that kind of crops up that just needs to be tracked and considered and understood. But it's a good tool to kind of keep everything honest, I think.
Right. And that must be quite an additional cost to create, all that digging and everything to create a stem wall around the building. That's,
yeah. Well, we were gonna excavate anyways. We were gonna take the insulation down and do a skirt. So it really was like, rather than digging any further, we were just kind of digging out a little bit more, like the extra depth of the wall.
Mm-hmm.
But it allowed for probably a lot of relief for, the panelizer and the engineers saying like, okay, we'll handle the gravity load differently. And, everybody will feel a lot better about this at the end of the day.
And that brings up the whole question of attachments. Like, okay, so you've found a panel manufacturer who's interested in working on the panels for a given project. Have attachments been a big issue for you, especially if you're trying to look at thermally broken attachments? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So for the panelized overclad, we are basically having the panelizer develop something that's similar to like a curtain wall style attachment for the panels. So right now it's still kind of custom. I think there's an opportunity to make it not so custom, which was the hope. But our panels on that particular project, there's a 9-inch gap between the existing building, the face of the brick, and the backside of the new panel. So we're running all of our systems, our ductwork, our line sets, is all going to be in that gap. So getting the gap, spanning the gap structurally with a clip and system, it started off with an off-the-shelf product, and it kind of evolved into something that looked a lot more custom. And it wasn't just because of the structural, it was because we were wanting to kind of integrate the attachment points for the erection of it as well, and saying like, I want this clip to be more than just its final hanging solution. I want it to work for me during the whole erection process in different ways. So it was, I think it's looking more like a curtain wall type solution. And it is not thermally broken. It's all steel. And so we have it basically attaches to the cold form metal framing portion of the panel. And then the insulation is continuous beyond that. So that while it's not thermally broken, we do have continuous insulation still.
Great. And so you mentioned that within your 9-inch gap, can you just talk about what services you're running in there?
Yeah, so we've got our fresh air ductwork, which will be coming from a giant ERV on the roof, 2 of them. And so they will snake across the roof down to the edge, dive down in a parapet, and then they're going to arrive at the window jamb of every unit. And so we'll get fresh air integrated into the new window jamb so that there's one less hole to make through the building. We're integrating it into the window, which will be new in the overclad in the panel. And then there'll be line sets. And we're in the very early process of, this project was designed prior to the refrigerant switchover. So we are now in a process of reconsidering our systems a little bit. So there'll be line sets of some sort, whether it's water or refrigerant is kind of to be determined. But so there'll be piping, and there'll be drains, and there will be ductwork and probably some limited power for things like light fixtures and whatnot on the exterior.
Wow. I mean, that's great to have that cavity to be able to fit all that in. And I guess there's some advantage to having the project experience delays, right? Because you're getting a chance to really have another opportunity to think through your mechanical systems.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just talking to you, it just brings up how complicated these, I mean, it just sounds so simple, right? Wrap a blanket around your building and we're done. But there's so many details to have to try and figure out.
There are so many details. You're absolutely right. Yeah. I think that's kind of the fun of it too. I think that's what led us to like really enjoying this, is that it's not your typical stuff. It's not your typical architecture, run at it. And that's really enticing for us, at least. I know, when we were like making this shift between what we had been doing for years to thinking about DERs, we went around the table, the Zoom table and Onion Flats, and we were like, what's the most exciting project we have right now? And I think everybody pointed to the DER and said, I like that. That's really exciting. I want to do more of that. So I think we're all just they're just interesting.
Right. I mean, all these complications that we've been talking about are also, it's not standard fare. You're figuring out on the fly and figuring out anew again, with every project. So, well, it's been really great to talk with you, and I'm looking forward to your presentation on November 5th for on the accelerator. And again, thanks very much for taking the time.
All right. Well, Mary, thank you so much for that great interview with Kara. what were some of your key takeaways?
Well, one of the things that she said right at the end, which I thought was great, was when they were deciding where they wanted the company to head, they went around the table and everybody said what excited them the most was the deep energy retrofit. So I
Yeah.
think that was great, and it helps explain why uh, they have come to be doing so many deep energy retrofit projects and have developed this expertise that is, not completely unique, but it's unusual in the US. And it was great talking with her about overclad solutions and what buildings are suitable for overclad solutions using panelized approach. I just really, because that their company has the experience of working with that, and what has happened during the last 2 years with that since I last talked to her. So that was great.
Yeah, I also was struck by that kind of vibe of I want to do more of that when it comes to these very complex projects. And um, Onion Flats has been a leader, as you alluded to in the intro, a leader in Passive House since the early days of the adoption of Passive House here in North America, with Tim McDonald kind of adopting an approach of he's just going to do Passive House. He's not going to ask for permission. He's going to make it work and make it pencil, and has been. And so this is a logical kind of outgrowth, I think, of that leadership, and it's full and so they just like are volunteering for the early adopter kind of experience of figuring out all these different like what are the challenges, and then figuring out the solutions to those challenges. So after hearing this conversation between the two of you and the kind of really kind of, I think, realizing the complexity, it's also great to see that there's this sense that those are the projects that that the firm feels are the most fun, that that's not the typical stuff. It's the challenging stuff, and these are we need to figure out solutions to them as an industry. So I'm super grateful for the work that they're all doing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the unfortunate thing about doing retrofits is that it's so hard to really predict the perfect approach to doing a building until you really dig into it. And she brought that up multiple times and in multiple ways. Yes, you have to have a regular facade with regular window openings in order to be an appropriate building for a panelized approach. But then there are all these other factors which can complicate
Right.
projects. So
That are unrelated to energy, right, or just the accessibility kind of needs and all of that. I also was yeah, you mentioned the challenges and the adaptability. That she mentioned pivots several times. That just there's a need to pivot when you discover new information. And so and I think that as with each of those pivots, there's a creation of a new solution set potentially, which might as more of these projects are happening, hopefully those will amass into kind of a library that will be useful to Onion Flats and also the rest of us. I also you asked about the scan of the building interior. That seemed like a really just one of those examples of new technology being really useful. That kind of intel, it just seems like so powerful, and the fact that it is now inexpensive to, at least not the point cloud version, but the imaging of the interiors. That just seems like an important, a necessary component to this kind of work.
absolutely, yeah. I had to look up what a Matterport scan was afterwards. But, as you said, it's the cost of doing that is coming down, and it really gives people a visual understanding of the building, so that they don't have to keep running in and interrupt the occupants with, like, where is your radiator again, or where is your window in relationship to the door? Because, they have that scan and they can look at the image and see, oh yeah, that's where it is. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
great.
exactly. Yeah. Well, really great stuff. Mary, is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, I think that's, I think we've hit on some of the
Yeah.
high points. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, yeah, like I say, just I'd say more power to Onion Flats and to Kara and the team there for the excellent work they're doing. Kara, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is going to be presenting to Passive House Accelerator this week, as well as to the Reimagine Buildings Collective. So this Wednesday, November 5th, Kara will join us for a Passive House Accelerator Live 101 episode called Deep Energy Exterior Retrofits. And then on Friday, November 7th, she'll be inside the Reimagine Buildings Collective speaking with members of the collective at an Ask Me Anything Friday session. So if you want to, that's a really great one too. You can take in the presentation on Wednesday and then join the collective and join us on Friday to ask any deep questions you have of Kara. We also are really excited to be announcing our Reimagine Buildings Best of Retrofit Conference, which will be on December 5th. So Friday, December 5th. And it is full of amazing leaders like Kara, who will be sharing their work and providing kind of blueprints that we can, that not literally blueprints, but blueprints of solutions that we can bring to retrofits of all scales. So we hope that you'll mark your calendar for December 5th. You can go to the Passive House Accelerator website, and at the top, we will have a banner that will make it really easy for you to find the registration link for our December 5th conference. So we hope you'll join us there. And I think that's pretty much it. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to the Passive House podcast. I encourage you to invite your friends and colleagues to check us out and to become subscribers. If you aren't subscribing, please hit the subscribe button, and we'd love for you to write a review for us as well to help us get the word out about the work we're doing here at the podcast. So Mary, thank you again. Thanks so much for bringing this interview with Kara to us.
yeah, it was really fun.
All right, with that, have a great week, everyone. See ya.